Coming up on This Week in Radio Tech. I'm not in the usual office. I'm in Spain, but it's 11 o'clock at night here. But hey, Cris Tarr is here. He's the star of today's show. He's in the Central Time Zone. We're talking about building your new FM radio station. It's a multi-part series. The first part is coming up next on TWiRT.
This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you by Broadcasters General Store with outstanding service, savings, and support. Online at bgs.cc. By Broadcast Bionics with the Bionics Studio, including talk show control, social media, and visual radio. Broadcast Bionics brings exceptional audience engagement to radio and TV. By Angry Audio. Audio problems disappear when you get angry at angryaudio.com. And by Max Connect Wireless, prioritized high-speed internet service designed for transmitter sites and remote broadcasts.
Hey, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack, your host. Welcome to our first episode of the year 2025. Doesn't that sound like it's in the future? Well, here we are, in the future. Except the future is now. Where have we heard that before? Hey, I'm glad that you're with us. Cris Tarr is along, and also we'll introduce him in just a second. And I'm not in the usual Telos Alliance studio in Nashville, Tennessee. No, I and my wife are visiting relatives, new relatives to me, in Pontevedra, Spain. So I'm across the Atlantic Ocean from our usual haunt in Nashville, and I'm here on the northwest corner of Spain, just north of Portugal. And we've just got here 36 hours ago and having a blast meeting relatives and her former work colleagues. And we've already been out dining and been served some great food. So be here a couple of weeks, but the show must go on. So we're doing This Week in Radio Tech. I'm here. Doesn't really matter where I am, does it? But it does matter where Cris Tarr is. He's on the other microphone and the other camera. Cris, welcome in. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I wish I was out there enjoying Spain instead of enjoying Wisconsin in the winter, but here we are.
I wish I could say it was warm here, but it's not. The weather here is almost exactly what we left in Nashville. Daytime highs in the mid-50s and overnight lows down close to 40. I mean, it's definitely coat and jacket weather. This evening we were walking around downtown Pontevedra, Spain, and it was windy. So we kind of took our jackets and bundled up, and we actually had a coffee and a glass of wine out on an outdoor, but it had the plastic sheeting around the outdoor dining area.
Sure.
But some people were eating outdoors. But if you didn't have a windbreak, and they had those gas candelabra sort of heaters, right? If we didn't have that, it would not be pleasant. So
it's supposed to be 19 tonight. I don't think we're going to be doing that.
Oh, 19. That's Celsius, right? That'd be like 70 Fahrenheit.
That's American degrees.
Gosh. Well, hey,
freedom
Cris
temperature.
And I have freedom temperature. That's right. Cris and I have a treat for you. I was talking to Cris about, hey, what's something kind of special we could do in 2025, and we're going to do this for at least for the first couple of episodes this year, but we may carry this on some more. In fact, I guess, Cris, we talked about taking questions, and we do have. Can you hear me? Okay, Cris, you all right?
Oh yeah, yep.
Okay, good. Oh, I'm sorry. I know what I did. I blew myself up. We are live on YouTube right now. So if you're watching this live, if you watch us on YouTube, and that's where we stream live, but we also push it out to Facebook. But if you want to check out our YouTube channel, it's easy to find. It's TWiRT, This Week in Radio Tech, on YouTube. And if you want to be part of our show, you can get into the live chat. Does the live chat work? Oh yeah, I guess it does. There it is. Okay, so I'll monitor the live chat just a bit because Cris is going to be doing most of the talking. So the idea here is that we are going to do a kind of a foundational series, a back to basics. We're going to answer questions that, hey, you could get these answers from any seasoned broadcast engineer, and maybe some who are not so seasoned. But if you're kind of new to this, or you'd like a refresher, or you just like to hear Chris's ideas and maybe a few of mine on a lot of basic questions, some great advice on building radio stations. That's what this Back to Basics series is going to be about. And our first episode, we're going to talk about, you've been given a construction permit to build a radio station. Well, you bought one or you've applied for one and you've got it from the FCC, but you've got permission now to build an FM radio station. What are some of your next steps? And that's what Cris is going to talk about. I'll pose some questions. Cris will give the answers. I might interject a little bit here and there. And so I think this will be very useful advice. There's maybe a certain order you want to get things done in. There are certain things you need to have in place before you get, pouring concrete or building a tower or ordering a transmitter. That's what we're going to be talking about. Cris, have I got that set up kind of right? Does that sound
Yeah,
right?
pretty much. We'll call it a thought experiment.
A thought experiment. Okay. Well, like I said, I will, let's see, in the chat on YouTube, I'm going to say, ask your questions here. Let's see if that works. Yep, I guess that works. Okie dokie. So we're on YouTube live. Ask your questions there. Okay, Cris, got a construction permit from the FCC.
Yes.
That's the first step. And the most important thing about building a radio station when you have a construction permit probably is building it in compliance with the construction permit.
Sure.
Because otherwise, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, when you file for a construction permit, at that point, you've already decided, where you're going to put the station. You can change that. We'll talk about that. But you've already decided, either through auction or whatever, what the city of license is going to be, where the transmitter is going to be located, what the power is going to be, what class of station, everything else. So at this point, you've been awarded that construction permit that now says, here, go ahead and build it. Now, one of the things that people forget or sometimes don't know about construction permits is if you follow the rule of the law, you can't even start building it until you get a construction permit. Now, you can, have the stuff sitting around, but the FCC says you actually can't start building this radio station until you have your permit. And, I guess that's, they like to say that prevents people from building it and using that as an objection or, whatever that, hey, we spent all this money to build it and now you're saying we can't do it. The FCC says, no, you got to put on the brakes. And I've done many of these over the years, construction permit on the air. And typically what I say is, obviously you don't know till you know with a construction permit. But if you have a good FCC attorney and a really good consulting engineer, you'll get a pretty good shot at knowing that you're good. You'll get to a certain point along the way where you're going to be good to go. And that's usually when I say, okay, start looking for equipment to build this. And that's typically how that process starts. And like I said, sometimes, there's some speed bumps, but usually the FCC is pretty good at contacting the people on the application if there's an issue that needs to be a minor issue that needs to be corrected. But do not put that antenna up and get that steel in the air until you've got that approval.
Hey, let me ask you, on a construction permit, what does it typically say on the construction permit? I guess it's got the licensee's name. Better be the same licensee. If it's, Joe Blow Broadcasting, it better be Joe Blow Broadcasting. And I wonder, does the CP list the ownership status of the owners in that company?
Just basically the construction permit is just the licensee, and it will say the location, pretty much all the technical parameters that you've filed for along the way. So, class, height above average terrain. It will not do transmitter power output. That's part of the license to cover, but it will say ERP. And that's about it. It won't specify, antennas and things like that. Unless if with translators, you have to use the specified antenna. But with FMs, you don't specify any of that till after it's built, but you will have the height above average terrain, the location coordinates of the tower ASR, the licensee name, and then the expiration date of the permit.
And this is interesting. You mentioned the height above average terrain, and that's of the center of radiation of your antenna. Most FM stations are going to have an antenna that's kind of long vertically.
Mhm.
It might, if you're a higher power station, you might have 6 or 8 or 10 or a dozen bays of antenna. If you've got 10 bays of antenna, you've got an antenna that's almost 100 feet long. So
Right.
depending
It's
on
center
the
of
frequency
radiation.
of the station. Right. So
Yeah.
center
Center
of
of radiation.
radiation, yeah, got to match up. And you mentioned it's got an expiration date.
Yes.
Cris, why do I see so many station owners put off for one reason or another, or 10 reasons, building their station until the last minute, like there's a big flurry of hurry a month before the construction permit runs out?
Well, I can give you an example of one, in fact, that I was involved in. This was a nonprofit, and they just didn't really. It took them quite a while to get through the process of getting their construction permit. Everything got issued. Then it was, well, okay, they didn't have it. They had to build a tower and do all these other things that got delayed and messed around. And I got called, and I think I've told this story before, but it was. Oh boy, I've now been with them, I think 10 years as their consulting engineer. But I got a call from this group of people that got referred me to them. And this was maybe early in December. And they said, hey, we've got this construction permit. We've got to build this station. We were wondering if you could give us a hand. We're kind of stuck, and, with towers almost done, but, that's about where we're at. I said, great. Well, I'm kind of busy. Let's get through the holidays. And then in January, we'll get this done. Yeah, the construction permit expires in 3 weeks. So, I basically, the next day I got down there and I said, okay, we're going to do everything I say to do when I say to do it. And I think we'll do it. And we actually I turned the power on the transmitter the day before the construction permit expired. So, I think in a lot of cases, there's so many things, and we're going to talk about some of this stuff. There's so many things that go into building a station that if, for example, you're not a seasoned broadcaster, you probably don't really realize what goes into making this happen and the money that you need to spend and all the work that's required. So I think sometimes they get into this and go, oh my goodness, I was not prepared at all for making this happen. Or, maybe they saw the opportunity, but they weren't quite ready to do it yet. So they got the construction permit and then said, okay, now when I'm ready to go, I'm ready to go. Maybe they just weren't ready to do it right now. And then, there's also the idea, which you can do, you kind of take a risk doing it, but you can let that expire and refile immediately to restart that process. Now, we did that with a station in our group where, for years and years and years, we had this construction permit for probably 15 years, and we had to keep renewing it or refiling because we kept getting objections for building the tower. And we had to fight with the county and this, and that's another, something else that can happen. We had to fight. And finally, we ended up 15 years later, which was last year. We bought a group of stations and they had a tower really close to where we were originally going to build that station. So we could completely bypass having to build a tower. We just had to modify the permit and we got it built right away. So, those are things that can happen that will slow you down for sure.
So if you have a construction permit, and of course you need to start getting all these ducks in a row, one thing that stymied a station that Larry Fuss and I were building was we needed 3-phase power out to this site where the tower was going up. And there was 3-phase power on the road. We were a block and a half away from the road. It was single phase to the houses that were nearby, so we needed the 3-phase. And the excuse that we got from the power company was, well, that crew, they're out deer hunting. They could be gone for about 6 weeks, and they're not going to set no poles, until they get back from, they're at deer camp.
Right.
So,
right.
Apparently, unless there's a major ice storm, they weren't coming back. And then there are, like you said, people object to a tower. Yeah, you were ready to build a tower, and yet there was some permitting that you didn't get, and there you go.
And that's the dance, because you don't want to you want to build the tower until you get the construction permit, because if you build the tower and you don't get the construction permit, you've just wasted a lot of money.
Yeah.
So that's again where we're talking about sometimes things have to go in a certain order. We had to be granted the construction permit before we could even think about the tower. So we got granted the construction permit, and then all of a sudden we tried to get the tower built where we said it was going to get built, which we had an agreement for the land and everything. And oh no, that was not going to happen. So there's a bunch of NIMBYs. So, it pretty much shut it down. So that, those are things that can happen because, again, unless you are, you're using an existing tower and you can get all that paperwork done. And even then, you don't want to sign a long-term lease until you get that construction permit. So, oftentimes what I'll do is I'll get the lease teed up and I'll get everything ready. And then, we get the construction permit and we sign all the papers for the lease, because that's the other thing. So, there is a very certain order where these have to go. And that's why sometimes, a construction permit will expire, because it can take some time to get all of these things, power and the build out and the leases and everything done in time to get it on the air.
Something I should mention, I have seen issues with towers where you apply for a tower location and somebody misread the map, or something is wrong with the coordinates, or you're going on somebody else's tower and something was wrong with the coordinates they supplied to you. There are so many FM stations in the USA, and I'm sure other countries too, where a lot of them are spaced pretty darn close to where they can be. You might be literally a few hundred feet out, in where you can be, and if your coordinates were off in the wrong direction and you discover it then or later, you may end up having a real problem building your radio station. You may have to reduce power, put in a directional antenna, or build a tower somewhere, a few hundred feet that way, because some of these are really tightly spaced in. You ever run across a problem like that?
Yeah, and actually, in most cases, if it's the type of situation you're talking about, the power reduction would be pretty minimal. We were just actually dealing with that with a co-channel station of ours in one of our markets, where it turns out that someone on our co-channel has been, overpowered for a long time now, and because it was a little bit short spaced, and what happened was they went to true up their coordinates and figured out that the new coordinates, they're short spaced. And, they had to go down by a couple thousand watts or something, but it was a big Class C. Nobody knew. I mean, and to be honest, they had been like that for years and we didn't know. So, those things can happen. Typically if it's just, a couple of seconds in change in coordinates, it's not going to affect you. And if it does, worst case is the power reduction needed to reduce that power is pretty slim. Now, if it's something more, larger, then, all bets aren't off yet. I mean, you can still look at doing a directional antenna or a slightly directional antenna to attenuate the signal in the direction of the co-channel. So there are options there.
Gotcha. Hey, we're talking to Cris Tarr. We're just getting into talking about building an FM radio station, kind of a back to basics thing, things you need to think about, things that Cris and I have run across, difficulties in getting an FM station built, and the things that you need to think about. We've talked about your tower location, when you can and can't build a tower or get ready to. You can't jump the gun on the construction permit. Once you've got it, you're clear to build, although you're not clear to broadcast unless you follow certain rules and apply for that license to cover the construction permit. You got to be at the right height, the right power. Your construction permit may specify the power of the station, but not the power of the transmitter. You got to calculate the power of the transmitter based on the length of the transmission line and the gain of the antenna. We're going to cover that, a little bit of that math in just a minute. I'm Kirk Harnack. Cris Tarr is with us. We're doing a little back to basics series here on building a radio station. And next week, we'll talk about building your studios. But today, it's going to be all transmission and studio transmitter link. Our show is brought to you in part by our friends at Broadcast Bionics. But first, I want to mention we got a new sponsor coming up, not this week, but we're going to be very glad to welcome our friends at AIR, AIIR. And that company is the maker of Playout One Pro software, radio station automation software. You may have watched a couple of years ago, a fellow named Dave Brierly Jones was our guest, and he described a lot about how this software works and why it's so popular. But they're going to be joining us as a sponsor starting next week, so we're going to welcome them on board. But right now, let's hear from another one of our wonderful favorite sponsors, Broadcast Bionics, and this amazing product called Camera One. Check it out.
Camera One from Broadcast Bionics, designed to bring video to your audio content. Visualizing radio and podcasts for social media. Camera One can automatically create, capture and brand professionally switched video for live streaming or upload, making your production shareable. Control and configure using a web browser on any device. Camera One is available as a 4-camera or 8-camera system using the Blackmagic A10 Mini range, including the A10 Mini Extreme. You can use cameras to suit your studio and your budget. You'll need one camera for a studio wide shot and usually one camera per microphone. A standard multi-channel sound card or IP driver monitors audio from each studio microphone, and we work natively with Axia systems. Ideally, this will be a post-fader feed from each mic, although you can use pre-fade audio or a mic split if that's all you have available. These audio levels are used to intelligently switch the video feed when each contributor is talking. You can also group microphones together into one shot and use the audio from a mixer's aux bus. You can use Camera One's auto switch feature, or disable it and switch using the on-screen buttons or the buttons on the A10. Recordings can automatically start when you tell the system you're on the air. This on-air indication can be linked to your studio's red lights via IP or an Avantec Adam GPIO interface. You can quickly browse all the videos that have been automatically created during your broadcast, download them and post. Camera One is a user-installable system. You'll need a good spec Windows 10 PC, i7 with plenty of storage and 16 gig of RAM. It's better if this machine isn't used for anything else. Remember, you can control the software in a web browser on another device on your network. Camera One, a thrifty way of creating scroll-stopping video from your show or podcast from Broadcast Bionics.
This is certainly a popular option from Broadcast Bionics. Camera One, just part of a number of products that Broadcast Bionics makes that make your job as a talent and as an engineer a lot easier. You make more content that you can put right out there, some of it even just about automatically. Get that content out there for your listeners to grow your audience and keep them engaged. Thanks a lot to Broadcast Bionics for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. I do appreciate you. Hey, it's Kirk Harnack. I'm in Spain. That's why it's dark outside. It's late at night here. Cris Tarr is here. It's a regular time in the late afternoon for Cris. Although, Cris, I guess your sun's going down. It's getting dark outside there. And
it is. Yes, it is.
Well,
it sure is.
Glad you're safe. You're safe and warm inside. We're talking about back to basics, talking about building a radio station, and we've talked about the construction permit, what it's going to say on there. Make sure your tower site's right. The whole goal of the construction permit in the FCC is to make sure you're at the right geographical location and at the right height, transmitting the right amount of power out across the countryside, covering the hills and the valleys and the listeners out there. So that's about that goal, right, Cris? That's how that has to happen.
Yeah, basically what the construction permit is that's the FCC saying that their analysts have looked at this and they've looked at, the data that you've sent them. And yes, that radio station with those parameters can work and you can be licensed for that. So here, go ahead. Here's your permit. You may build it, as specified on the construction permit for those parameters. And now it doesn't tell you like transmitters, antennas, lines, anything else. It just says, okay, you can build this station on this frequency at this ERP at this location. Now, you can change some of those in the process. You can amend or modify construction permits along the way. If maybe you find a better tower site or something like that, or you find that, you could actually, from a slightly different location, upgrade classes, stuff like that. You can do that during this process. So there is some flexibility there in terms of, you're not locked into absolutely having to build it that way, but you do have to then go through the process of having that construction permit amended. And that's what we did with that one I was telling you about where we fought for the tower site for so long. We just modified the construction permit to specify the new location.
One of the things I've seen that's a common small thing, and that is getting the height of the center of radiation of the antenna the same as the construction permit. I think you're allowed plus or minus what, about a meter on that height
Yeah, it's a
without
little bit.
having to do anything?
Yeah, it's a little bit more than that. I think it depends on. I think you got a little bit more down than you do up, but I don't remember off the top of my head what that is.
So sometimes when the tower crew is mounting the antenna, they might say, look, there's an antenna really close up above you. You guys need to be down a little bit. Or there's a guy wire right in the way here. If you guys could move up, 20 feet or down 30 feet, it's going to be a much better installation. So there's things that you can modify that construction permit. If you go up, you're going to have to reduce power by, the right amount if you're at that top limit. If you go down, you don't have to do much of anything except say, hey, we're going to transmit, 20 feet lower than we were.
And the good news is that's pretty, those are pretty slam dunk changes. That's not one of those, I think, a showstopper thing. The FCC generally just plows those right through. So, a situation like that where you find yourself having to move, quite a bit higher or lower and adjusting the power level, you can go ahead and have them continue to build while you're filing all the paperwork for this, because it's a pretty foregone conclusion that they're going to approve that unless there's something majorly wrong.
So let's talk about antenna selection, because you're going to choose an antenna. You're going to choose transmission line and a transmitter power level that all work together to give you the proper, you said ERP earlier, that's effective radiated power. Now, and I think most people know this, there may be a couple who don't. If you're licensed for 25,000 watts, that doesn't mean you buy a 25,000 watt transmitter. You can, but you're going to waste a lot of electricity that way because in simple terms, when we transmit FM radio signals, we don't care about transmitting to the moon straight up. We don't have there's no surveys from Nielsen going to the moon. You also don't care about transmitting straight down to the transmitter building. What you care about is transmitting to the horizon. And you and your consulting engineer hopefully have had a conversation about, do we need a big antenna and a smaller transmitter? Or do we need a smaller antenna with less gain and a bigger transmitter? Because there's some reasonable things to do this. Cris, I have this thing where if a big antenna is going to have a lot more parts up there. Now, they're not moving parts. Well, they're not supposed to move, but the wind's going to shake them around and rattle them, and ice is going to form on them. And it's going to have a nicer, longer life if there are fewer parts up there. I'm sure antenna manufacturers might disagree with me a little bit, but if I had my choice, I'd rather, because if something goes wrong with the antenna and there's 12 bays of antenna up there, well, that can be a pretty complicated affair to figure out exactly what's wrong with it. I'd rather figure out problems on the ground than figure out problems in the air. Okay, little tiny piece of advice from me. What antenna advice, Cris, would you like to pass along about choosing an antenna if you and your consulting engineer have kind of figured out what size it ought to be?
First of all, I kind of lead into this conversation with a joke. Take 3 engineers outside and point up on a sunny day and ask them what color the sky is. One's going to say blue, one's going to say gray, and the third one's going to say blue, but I would have done it differently. So that's the thing about things like antenna selection. Everybody has their favorite, right? Everybody, are you a blonde or a brunette? But there is some science behind the antenna rather than there are some, and this is not always the case, but there are a lot of engineers out there that kind of have this black magic thing about antennas. Always use a 3-bay, always use an even number of bays, whatever. But there actually is a science behind how these antennas work. For example, in our discussion here, let's, and again, every situation is going to be different, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, we'll go in one direction. This is a Class A, that's kind of outside of the big city, a little bit, and it's fairly high ground, so that's not bad. What kind of antenna would you use in that situation? In a situation where I have one, I used a single bay antenna, and the reasoning for that is the beam width coming off of the tower. The more bays you have, the less power you have, but it's also the beam is spread out coming off of the tower out to the horizon. So in our situation, there was no population within the first couple of miles of this transmitter site. All of the population was much farther out. So in this case, the signal didn't really, the concentration of the signal really didn't get, get much better until you got farther out away from the antenna. So the signal close in wasn't very good, but the signal farther out was very good. So, there's a situation for that. Then you've got base spacing, spacing between the bays. Is it a full wave, half wave? That also makes a difference. For example, half wave spacing tends to perform better in situations where you've got lots of multipath concerns. Same thing with beam width. The beam width is tighter on a half wave spaced antenna, but you do need more bays to get additional gain. So, all that aside, you mentioned the hardware on the tower. Sometimes that's a factor. Usually, though, it's very much a combination of what are you trying to reach and what is your appetite for power consumption? Because obviously, you start with one bay and that's negative gain. So you actually almost have to do twice the power. If you have an ERP of 3 kilowatts, you're running over 6 kilowatts out of your transmitter to get that 3 radiated off of the antenna. Then you get into 2 bay, which is slightly less than full gain. 3 bay is usually unity gain. So what you put in is what you get out. And then from there, you start getting into more and more of less power, but you get more gain in the antenna. But of course, that beam width then gets much bigger. And so, that's great for closer in situations. Let's say you're a Class E station pretty close to your big city. You can use a 10 bay antenna all day long. And, you can, for 18 kilowatts, you can get 100 kilowatts ERP out and blanket that city. So, that's the thing is there's so many moving parts to all of this, and you owe yourself that conversation with your consulting engineer to say, here are some of my goals. And it's really important to know, okay, here's what we want to, and I'm hoping by this point you've done that. Here's the audience that we want to reach. Here's where the transmitters are going to be located. Here's the population that we want to target. And you can do things like, and I've done this, where you model the antenna, to make sure that it's properly placed on the tower. And you can use some of that stuff to your advantage, even though you can get in trouble if it's excessive. But for example, you can use the face of a tower to kind of work as a reflector to, really get your signal in the direction you want. Now, if you do that and it really, increases your gain quite a bit, you're going to get in trouble. There's a station in Texas, I believe, that got into a big mess because they actually constructed the tower to act as a director. And,
That's a director.
And was, ended up beaming like 3 times your ERP into the big city by doing that. You can't do that. But you can, you can use that to your advantage with placement on the tower. And I've done that in the past. Use kind of that natural shielding to work in your advantage.
I would add that every situation is different, as you pointed out, and talking to a consulting engineer who has actual experience with different antennas and different terrain regimes and different population centers is going to be very helpful. Now, if you're building a Class A radio station in West Undershirt, Arkansas, and your tower is in the middle of town, you're probably not going to have a big problem. Don't put 15 bays up there. You're going to skip over the town. But
and you're not going to want that kind of power anyway.
There's a station in Nashville. It's a Class A FM station. They really want to cover the city pretty well, so they went way over height. Normally a Class A would be 100 meters or 328 feet. They're at like 900 feet, and so they have to derate their power a lot. They elected to go with 1 bay, and their ERP is about 700 watts. I think they have to put 1,400 watts into the antenna because you get about half out of a 1 bay circular antenna. And so their transmitter way down at the bottom of the tower, with 900 feet of coax, it's pumping out, I don't know, 1,600, 1,800 watts of power, which still isn't a lot of power, but they thought this was going to be the best for them. And it probably is. They do have town right around them, and they have town 15 miles away. The population. So they thought long and hard about how to do this, and that's probably the best. Another difficult situation is, let's say you're going to put a new station, not that there's room for one, but a new station over, say, Denver, Colorado, and you're on a mountain just west of Denver, and your population center is down that way. You may want to get some electronic beam tilt into your signal, and they can actually construct the antenna to take that signal and tilt it downwards a couple or 3 degrees or so, because you don't want the power skipping over the top of Denver. You're in a nice high situation. You want that power to hit Denver. So there's options you can do with. They all cost money, but if you're going to build a new station for a population center and you're way too high, well, you're going to want to find out how to get that done. The whole goal here is to hit radios in where people are. That's the whole goal, right?
Well,
So
and there's a translator I built out in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And, in this area, when you're doing fill-in translators, you can go as high as you want, as long as you don't exceed the contour of the fill-in station. So I was able to do it at almost 750 feet, maybe even more, closer to 800 feet, with a single bay antenna for a 250 watt translator. So it was 250 watts ERP off of a single bay up at, 800 feet. That's almost a Class A signal. So, and because you're way up, that signal hits the horizon all over the place. So now, in that area of town, the signal wasn't very good, but you get out, half a mile away, and that signal really started working like gangbusters. So, those are the things that, now again, sometimes it's really simple. Sometimes, like you said, it's a small town. You got to stick right outside of the city limits, 3 bay on a 300-foot tower. You're good to go. Sometimes it's really simple like that. But then again, sometimes there are ways to, physics is a static thing. You can't defy laws of physics. But there are ways, like I said, I always say, to optimize every single watt you've got coming out. And there are a lot of situations where you want to do that. You really want to, you could just throw an antenna up and it'll work. I mean, you'll get to where you want to go and you'll get there. But do you want to do it really well? And that's where antennas and transmission lines and transmitters make all the difference in the world. And when you're dealing with smaller stations, especially, you need every ounce of performance you can get. You need every little single watt. And, every little piece has to be functioning at 100% in order for you to really maximize that signal. And that's where things like this come in. Number of bays, spacing, how you mount the tower, or how you mount the antenna on the tower. Some people always go, well, you got to point the antenna in the direction of the town you want. No, that's actually not the case. Off to the side a little bit. And, things like that. So, there's a lot of those types of things you need to take into consideration.
Let's chat about one choice that's often you have to make when you buy an antenna, because you might very well go with, let's say, one of the better quality ERI or PSI brand antennas, or maybe an SWR, something that dividing the power among the bays is done by nature of the fact that you've got a big piece of solid transmission line that is carrying power to all the bays. And by virtue of that, they're each tapped into this transmission line. They pretty much get equally fed. Versus a type of antenna that tends to be on the cheaper side, where you've got a device that is a power divider. So you've got power going, RF going in the bottom of it typically, and then it has 2 or 3 or 4 or maybe 6 taps coming typically off the top of it. And this is where you put coax, and you feed those coax then to the different antenna bays. Now, these are usually lower power antennas like you might have with a Class A station. Do you have a feeling, Cris, as to which antenna style makes sense for a broadcaster in different parts of the power spectrum?
I would almost always go for the interbay tuning rather than the power divider. Now, the exception to that is translators. And, because you're just not going to get, but even then, that's not there's never absolutes in this. But generally in translators where, I'm not, we're in town and it's just really not an issue, I'll go with the inexpensive ones with the combiner units on it. Every other situation, I will go with the higher quality antenna, because it is kind of you get what you pay for. And I had a situation with a station where, the signal just was not as good as I thought it should be. And we looked and went, you know what? We had a cheap antenna. I said, let's get a Shively. and put a Shively up there. And it was night and day. I mean, it really was a significant difference because generally when you're dealing with the ones with the outboard combiners, they're broadband antennas. And so they're jack of all trades, master of none. Because that interbay tuning also contributes. So generally that's all done to a specific frequency. So that antenna is going to be dead on the frequency that you're going to be broadcasting on. And so any day of the week, I will go with those. They just perform a whole lot better. So, especially if you're trying to, again, optimize every watt, you don't want to, those are one of the few things that you don't want to cheap out on.
I must say, I've had the I don't know how to quickly describe it, but the ones that don't have an outboard power divider, the ones that have real rigid hard line between all the bays, a rigid antenna, if you will. I've had tower crews misassemble those. I've come across stations where they had a bay upside down compared to the others. Well, that's no bueno. I've had one where they split a bullet in the assembly of the antenna. Well, that's no good. You had to bring the tower crew back to fix each of those problems. But I've also had tower crews misassemble or poorly assemble the ones with the outboard power dividers. Those have a lot more connectors in them going on. And they're smaller connectors typically. I don't know. My advice might be, let's say you've got 2 or 3 translators or stations in your group, and you've bought the cheaper antennas with the outboard power divider. You might want to buy some extra parts because there's certainly a chance that somebody has misassembled an end connector. They've split the center connector. I mean, there's more room. There's more places to make mistakes. At least,
and they generally, and those generally use like end connectors and that kind of thing too. And that kind of goes with another piece of advice, which is always know your tower crew and supervise. Because you'll find that a lot of those things don't happen if you're really on the ball. Again, that's where, especially when you're doing a full power station, a new build, new construction, again, do it right. Make sure that you've got a crew that isn't just Joe's climbing service out of the guy's backyard, with a couple of guys who started last week, and they're going to go drink some beers afterwards. That's fine for minor repairs, but when you're doing a full build, get a good crew. And when they're doing the antenna, be there, supervise, test. I often will take, I'll take my Bird Sightmaster and I'll sweep the antenna while it's on the ground after it's been built to make sure that it works. And then I will sweep the line before we connect everything up. So, take the time, spend a little extra money because, again, the hope is that when you build this, it's not only going to perform well, but it's going to perform well for a long time. You can get the stuff that's in the air that can last decades if you do it right. So spend the money now or spend it 4 times in the next 5 years. It's up to you.
So you'd probably agree, but some of the keys to longevity of an antenna up in the air, hundreds of feet up on that tower, you want it to be assembled correctly. And that means, if you're supposed to grease the O-rings, put whatever lubricant or grease is supposed to go on them. Make sure there's no split bullets. Put them together correctly. Make sure that the whole antenna, if it's a pressurized antenna, most of them are, that it always has nitrogen or other dry air pressure on it, so it doesn't get moisture coming into it. That causes plenty of problems. You don't want flashovers, so you're going to have soot and crap in there for years. And you also make sure that they install everything that they need to, that's supposed to be installed, to keep it from vibrating. Vibration will kill so much stuff. Over the years, that wind up there is 24/7. It just never stops. And it's always a lot more wind up there than it is on the ground. And so things just tend to sit up there and vibrate and vibrate and vibrate. I'll say the same thing for the transmission line coming down. We got to take a break here in a second, but by golly, I've had more trouble with tower crews doing a sloppy job installing transmission line. It can take a day or more to properly clamp transmission line, at 3-foot intervals or whatever's recommended to the tower, such that and also put the grounding kits on it, such that it doesn't sit there and vibrate and wobble and that it's tied well to the tower, and also that it's lifted. The weight of it is held in the places that it should be. You got a final comment on what I just said before we go to break, Cris?
Well, yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. I had a station that we bought and we later sold after I had to rebuild the whole thing. That was on a bad connection, and when we bought it, we didn't really think about it. We're like, why is this thing not at full power? So we put it at full power, and about 2 weeks later, it burned up. And that's because, over the years, this connection got bad, and, with less power in it, it was fine. And then we cranked up the juice and just smoked it. So, again, that those are all good points. And that all kind of, again, boils down to taking your time and doing it right and spending the money and getting the people together that know how to do it. Because, again, especially if this is a new station, you're going to put this on the air and you're going to be putting a bunch of money in promotions and getting the word out and everything else. And it's bad luck. You get that thing on there for a month or two and then it dies. And then you've got to try to find the money to get it back on the air again. So, do it right the first time. It's so important.
All right. We're going to take a quick break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the transmission line at the bottom of the tower. And that's where it connects to the transmitter. What are some of the considerations for grounding, for toroids that come with Nautel transmitters, for example? And what should you do at the bottom, and also choosing your transmitter. I'm Kirk Harnack. Cris Tarr is along. We're doing kind of a back to basics series. You're still welcome to join in our live chat on our YouTube channel. On YouTube, look for TWiRT This Week in Radio Tech and look for our live broadcast, and we can see your question and hopefully answer today. This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you in part by our friends at Broadcasters General Store and our other friends at Inovonics. And I want to put in a good word here for Inovonics. I think Suncast, if he's able to, is going to bring up a live. It's the Sophia HD Radio Site Streamer. Now, I just bought one of these for our stations on Maui, because this box is great remotely. I mean, from Nashville, Tennessee, or even, 11 time zones away here in Spain, I can go in and I can tune to any of our FM stations. And we've got about 6 of them there, plus some translators. We can tune into any of them and listen in good quality via MP3 streaming at a bit rate that we select. But we can also measure the RDS injection, the pilot injection. We can really have a good look. We can also look at a spectrum of the baseband. Now, I didn't get word from Suncast if he's able to pull up the live shot of this. If he doesn't pull it up, I'll assume he can't. On the back of the, not possible. Okay, on the back of the site streamer, it's got audio outputs. It's got both left and right analog outputs, and it's got an AES EBU output. Frankly, that's what I'm using to bring the output of this into my Axia system. There's a good picture of the back of it. Also, it does AOIP. It does AES 67 out the AOIP port, and it's got a LAN port for remote control connectivity. This box is just absolutely lovely. Oh, it's got some GPO points as well. You can program to alert you on loss of carrier, loss of audio, loss of RDS. You can have it alert you on any of those things. It's got a real-time clock in it for battery backup. SNMP fully supported. So Cris Tarr loves these Sophia boxes. And if you're doing HD, and this particular box we're showing you here, this also does HD radio decoding. We're going to be using that very soon in Hawaii. This shows you RDS, but it also shows you the pad, the program associated data, the pad with your HD transmission. So you can look at all of that remotely. Make sure that not only are you putting RDS data and pad into your transmissions, but they're also coming out on the other end. So they should show up on people's car radios and home receivers. This shows you all of that stuff. Absolutely love this box. We have the AM version of this. They have an AM version, and we have this HD radio version, which of course does analog FM as well as HD radio. The Sophia 568 HD radio site streamer. And on the front panel, it shows you the audio levels right there. So, even your non-engineer station employees can just take a quick look at it and they can see, hey, yeah, we got audio there. It's working well. From the front panel, they can tune other stations. You can put presets into it and tune other stations, or remotely. You can choose different stations, and you can even choose a frequency that maybe you didn't set into a preset. Just scan the dial up or down. It's got so many cool features. Absolutely love this box. Inovonics makes some amazing things, and we are using and loving this box all the time for our stations on Maui. Thanks a lot to Inovonics, and you can get your Inovonics 568 Sophia HD site stream. You can get that from Broadcasters General Store. Their website is bgs.cc. They sell all the things you need to build a radio station, even some things to build a TV studio they have at BGS. Check these guys out. I love BGS. They have sharp pencils, great deals. They really do sell for, the lowest prices that I can get anywhere. And they also have a great back-end system that helps you know when something is going to arrive. If you need something shipped overnight, often they can do that. They do keep inventory themselves, but they also have deals with all the dealers to do drop shipping. And they have, of course, drop shipping. Like you can order in soon enough in a day and get it out that afternoon, typically. Broadcasters General Store, their phone number, 352-622-7700. Thanks, BGS, for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. All right, Kirk Harnack and Cris Tarr along here for TWiRT, and we're talking about back to basics, the things you need to know to build an FM radio station. Cris, thinking about the transmission line, the coax, and hopefully you've selected the right size of coax for your particular job. A whole lot of stations need 1 5/8 coax that handles a broad range of power levels that we use in FM broadcasting. Of course, the higher ones may use bigger, like 3.5, 4.5, 5-inch, that kind of big size.
6,
3 1/8. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. I take it coax can be awfully expensive. Buying the right amount is pretty darn important. Otherwise, you could spend a lot of money you didn't have to. But you know what? If you don't spend enough and you buy too short, then you got a real problem, because the coax stretchers have been on back order for years now.
Right. Well, here's the thing again with understanding when you go to build this stuff. There's always a lead time. And in fact, during COVID, there were situations where I was waiting six or more months for 1 5/8 coax. It's certainly a possibility. But yes, measure 20 times, cut once. And I usually, I'll take my measurements and get it all together and add another probably 15 feet to it just to be safe. You don't want to overbuy because it's expensive. So you don't want to do, I'll go with another extra 50 or 75 feet. That's not really practical. But if you measure enough times and over the course of those measurements, it's going to be okay. We're looking at 400 feet from the bottom of the antenna into the building, close to where my transmitter is. Add another 15 feet to that. And that just gives you the wiggle room to make it happen. And then there's the question, okay, do you do, coax, the heliax into the building and then do hardline after that? There's discussions about that. So, there's a couple of different ways to do it, but obviously, you've got to get the right line for the right application. And, that takes, again, it's one of those things that's going to be there forever. So plan well.
And of course, getting the right size is key. If you are a lower power station and you're going to use a smaller size of coax, like maybe 7/8 inch coax, we had a station where I don't know how it happened. I kind of wasn't in charge, but somehow some 7/8 coax got bought, and it wasn't feasible to send nitrogen up the center conductor so it could get to the antenna. The antenna wanted to be pressurized. We couldn't get the proper connectors at the ends to block or to pass the nitrogen. So we actually ended up running a tube all the way up to the antenna, a separate tube to carry nitrogen all the way up to the antenna. You ever seen that?
I have. Actually, one of my sites, they did that for the same reason. It was foam dielectric, and you couldn't send the pressure up the center conductor. So they just ran I ran a new one when I got there. Just got some UV rated tubing and brought it up to the top.
Yep.
And then, the other thing you want to know about, just briefly, we don't want to get into too much into the weeds here, but the size of coax not only determines power handling capability, but losses as well. The larger the cable, the less losses there are. So, and same with air versus foam dielectric. But, when you're talking about, like a translator or very low power FM where, you're going to be using 7/8 inch line, there's a good chance that, we're not looking at a whole lot of transmitter to feed that. So you're not really too concerned about the losses involved there. And also generally you're going to be using an antenna that probably won't be pressurized, because at that power level, you're not really worried about it. You're not going to burn anything out at that power level. So,
this particular station
as well.
This particular station, the choice of antenna, we didn't want one with an external power divider. So we wanted one that ended up taking pressurization to keep it dry inside, but it didn't deserve anything bigger than 7/8 coax to get the power up there. So anyway.
Sure. And that's a situation where you would. If you had like a single bay of those, it generally isn't going to be pressurized. So you're not really going to worry about that. But yeah, if you're looking at multiple bays, you're probably looking at having a pressurized line for the bays.
So I have, now there's a whole separate category of transmission line, which is rigid transmission line, which comes typically in 20-foot sections. It may be a little less or a little more depending on what frequency your station is, because you don't want the length of the transmission line sections to be an exact multiple of the wavelength of your station. There's whole reasons behind that. So they actually sell rigid transmission line in several lengths that are close to 20 feet, but a little bit different. Talk to your consulting engineer about that. But apart from that, let's look at a more typical scenario, Cris, where you've got flexible transmission line going up the tower, but inside the building, you've got two transmitters and you've got an A/B switch to switch between them. The transmitter not on the air goes to a dry load, a dummy load. The transmitter on the air goes to the antenna. You have an electric switch that switches between these two. Usually, engineers will use rigid indoor, not pressurized, rigid indoor transmission line to go from each transmitter to that switch, and then from the switch down to the dummy load. I got a question. Why do we choose rigid transmission line instead of using a length of coax from each transmitter to that switch? Why is that?
I think, first of all, there's less losses by doing it that way, because you're not running through a bunch of connectors. You're also getting an exact length versus a kind of a estimated length, and making those bends and all that kind of stuff. And again, it just also makes the site work easier without having coax strung all over the place. So that's pretty common to use that hard line. And one thing, since we're talking about it, that I want to bring up, because I have seen this, drives me insane. Do not cut that hard line with a Sawzall. Just don't do it. Buy yourself.
What do you use?
Pipe cutter. I use a regular plumbing pipe cutter, and you turn it as you turn it around and around, and you crank on the knob as you're doing it. It gives you a nice, clean, even cut. And then I take a pipe reamer and go inside and bevel the insides to get rid of all the excess stuff. Plus, by beveling it, it slides easier over its companion part, or through the bullet slides in easier and things like that. But I don't know how many times I've seen somebody just draw with a Sharpie and right through it there, and it's crooked or offset, and there's copper all over the place. Don't do it. Just don't. That's my message for today. The more you know.
Good advice.
But I mean, and you can get the automatic switch, or you can get the manual patch panel thing. But yeah, generally, it's just, you can control the losses. You can control a whole lot of things with hardline. It's just harder to install, and so that's why that's another factor. If you're really not comfortable doing it, then get yourself an exact length of heliax and do it that way.
Now I got to ask you a little funny question. When you're putting that big switch up in the ceiling, switch between transmitters, are you the kind of engineer that will use unistrut and all thread, or do you use 2x4s and a come along?
I'm kind of preferential to the unistrut myself. Now, on the other hand, if I'm down south, I'm using the 2x4 because that's what they know. But up here in these parts, we use the unistrut and the threaded rod.
That's definitely the way to go. All right, Cris, we're going to run short on time, so tell you what, let's do. We're going to take a quick break, and you're part of the break, Cris, so don't go away.
Okay.
And when we come back, we are going to talk a little bit about transmitter selection, and that'll have to be our tip of the week too, because we're kind of running shy on time here. We spent too much time with Kirk's stupid joke about Unistrut.
Yeah.
Wars. All right. This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you in part by our amazing friends at Angry Audio. The website's angryaudio.com. And Cris Tarr loves to tell us about their audio processing, whether it's mic processing, stream processing, headphone processing. Cris, what would you like to chat us about today?
Well, first of all, my dulcet tones are courtesy of the Rebel mic processor, the Angry Audio C4 Rebel. Which is a fantastic mic processor. As I said, I'm using it right now with my RE20 microphone. It is a really cool, simple, out-of-the-box adjustment. But I also want to talk about really quickly, I haven't talked about this for a while, the C-level for on-air broadcast processing. And I really like doing this, especially for this conversation, because we're going to get into that with processing and ways to handle that. I use them on all of my radio stations. I bought, I think, 25 of these boxes. And they are fantastic for, especially with older processors. What they do is they take over the AGC section of your current processor, and it does it so much better. Even better than, the gold standard used to be the Aphex Compeller, which isn't around much anymore. These replace that and do such a better job at it than the Compeller ever did. It's almost like you don't know it's there. And that's the great part about it. It doesn't really color the audio, but just all of a sudden, everything sounds fuller and more even and more consistent. And with that means that you can feed your audio to your processor right into the slot that it's happy at. Most processors, we've talked about this before, have a sweet spot where, with gain reduction, where they work the best. And the hardest part is keeping that audio level into that slot where that processor works the best. This will do that. Whether you're feeding it into an STL or you're feeding it directly into a processor, this will make your audio sound so consistent, not only level-wise, but sonically with EQ and things like that. And this will be able to feed your audio processor. In fact, what I do, and there's a great picture right there with the Omnia 6, that is actually one of the setups that I have. We started this early on, where I just disable the AGC on the Omnia 6, and I use the Angry Audio box to feed that processor. So what it will do is it will make new processors sound great. It'll make old processors sound like new processors. It's amazing. It will give new life into your older Optimods and your older Omnias and what have you. And they'll make them sound brand new. So be sure and check it out. They will be happy to demo a box for you. Call your local, your favorite broadcast equipment salesperson, and they will get you set up with the Angry Audio. And I'll tell you what, it will change the sound of your radio station in so many ways. You are going to be happy, I promise you. Check them out, angryaudio.com. You can check out the C4 audio processors, including the little mic processors. I'll get that processor that I've got here. angryaudio.com. Problems go away when you get angry.
And, since I'm remote here in Spain, I had to travel light, and all I could bring with me for a mic at the moment is this headset. And when we talked to Suncast before the show got started, Suncast said, Cris, can you turn your mic down a bit? You are really overwhelming Kirk. So I can see.
Which was kind of, in fact, I remember having this conversation with Catfish. He said, you wanted to buy a chameleon. I said, yeah, he let me know when they had one on B stock. I said, my only goal here is to sound better than Kirk.
Oh, gosh. Funny. Hey, our show This Week in Radio Tech is also brought to you by Max Connect Wireless. And let me show you that their latest plan to help you out. Of course, Max Connect Wireless has offered you a prioritized LTE service to get internet or connectivity that you need to various sites like transmitter sites or remote broadcasts, especially tough remote broadcasts. Well, here's a great solution from them. Let's say that you don't want to consume a whole lot of data over LTE. Well, they have a new router system now that will prioritize data from a different source, yet still give you backup over LTE 4G. That's right. So I think we've got a graphic we might be able to show you here from the website. Using this Max Connect router, it'll prioritize whatever you want. But let's say that you have a Starlink system at your transmitter site to get connectivity there. But your Starlink goes out. Maybe a big raccoon gets on the dish and topples it over. Whatever may happen, or maybe you are actually on some kind of wired service at your transmitter site, but it fails, and you need connectivity to that transmitter site. Well, the Max Connect LTE router will take over when your main fails, and then you'll be using Max Connect's 4G LTE prioritized data. You can set the priorities setup however you like, but then you can use this one Max Connect LTE router, perhaps through an Ethernet switch, to remote control various things at your transmitter site, or even send 24/7 audio to the transmitter site. Again, using 4G LTE as a backup instead of as a main, or whatever you need to do. Talk to the folks at Max Connect. They will definitely help you out and help you figure out what is best for you at your transmitter site. Simply go to maxconnect.com. I know it's spelled funny because the internet, but MAXXKONNECT, and talk to them about what you need to do, what your goals are, what you'd like to accomplish, what your pain point is at your transmitter site, your remote broadcast, whatever the situation might be, and they will definitely help you out. They've helped out hundreds of broadcasters across the USA and in Canada as well. Thanks a lot, Max Connect, for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. All right, Cris, we got very little time left, but let's talk about transmitter selection.
Yes.
I guess most transmitters. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was telling you, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, most transmitters these days are of the solid state variety. Loving that. But, how do you start to make your transmitter selection, Cris?
It's pretty, it's gotten simpler. I really have a rule of thumb here, which is I don't buy any used tube transmitters anymore unless it's high power. There's just no reason to, and you're not going to be happy. Solid state transmitters have become very affordable, and there's a lot of them on the used market. I've bought so far, I think 4 or 5 used solid state transmitters. And as long as they're cared for, they will last forever. Keep the filters changed, keep them in, in good environments, and they will last forever. But, there is no reason nowadays to buy a tube transmitter. You can't get tubes for them. And if you can, they're really expensive. So it's tempting because when you're trying to start a radio station, boy, you can get a lot of those tube transmitters really, really inexpensively. But if you're doing anything less than 20 kilowatts, don't even think about getting a tube transmitter. Go with solid state every day of the week.
What about the availability of new or rebuilt tubes? Is that getting to be really problematic these days?
Oh yeah, I mean that's one of the issues we're having, and why we've been pushing so hard to replace all of our tube transmitters with solid state in one form or another, even use solid state, because we just can't. The cost of the tubes, if you can get them, is just crazy. And not only that, but maintenance. Remember that a lot of these transmitter manufacturers, stopped making these transmitters years ago. And, you're starting to get into limited support for them. So if you need parts or something, good luck. And not only that, but they're a lot more difficult to diagnose and repair. So that's got to be a factor too. If you're in a situation where you don't have an engineer close by to take care of you, it's a whole lot easier to replace a power drawer than it is to try to replace a tube or anything in between the tube and the power supply of a tube transmitter.
I haven't had much go wrong with any of the Nautel transmitters that I have, but I love that they a couple times have been able to remote into my site, have a look at the logs, have a look at just the readings, and I don't spend enough time with them to be able to diagnose a lot of things myself. But they'll come in remotely and look at it and say, "Oh, well, you're this or that is bad or going bad. We'll need to send you either the part or the sled or the assembly or the pallet or whatever it may be, or a new fan for that power supply, whatever the problem might be." And I've been really impressed with the remote diagnosis. And even though I love being an expert when I can, which ain't so often these days, but I sure can call Nautel to come in remotely. And I'm other manufacturers, may have similar deals as well, but I've just been so happy with their making my life simple.
Yeah, and again, I mean, they're so simple to operate, and we've talked about this before, where you've got low voltage, high current versus high voltage, low current, and which is more destructive, and that sort of thing. And so we can go into that next week as we talk about HVAC considerations and things like that. But I will tell you just off the top of my head with transmitter considerations, I will not buy a tube transmitter. The only exception is I have a transmitter that's a site that uses 23 kilowatts and it's not HD. And, I found a great, 15-year-old BE transmitter, which are really well built. I have a lot of history with them. They run forever. And I got it for free. So I'm like, yep, I will take that deal all day long and I'll put that in there. But if it were like a 3 kilowatt, I've turned down, 5 kilowatt transmitters because they were tubes. And I'm like, yeah, I can get it for free, but I don't want it. We're just not going to go that route.
A lot more airflow considerations, so many more things to think about that you kind of don't want to have to deal with a tube transmitter. Even though we dealt with them for decades, I'm just like you. I'm glad we're out of dealing with that. Hey, next week, Cris, we'll continue by talking about a little bit about, you mentioned HD, and that's a consideration when you're thinking about a transmitter and what has to change when you want to, if you're going to put HD radio signals on that same transmitter. We'll also talk about HVAC at the site. And next week, we're going to talk about studio to transmitter links. There's a lot of ways to do that now. There used to be only 1 or 2 ways to do that. Now there are several ways to get your audio from wherever you're making it to wherever you need to transmit it. And there's different ways to get this done. So Cris and I will have some good ideas for you on that. Some of them are darn near free. I mean, they're close. So we'll check it out. Cris, thanks so much for bringing us this back to basics and teaching us what we need to know to build a radio station.
You're welcome. I have a lot of fun talking about this stuff. It's my job. This is what I do. So I enjoy it a lot.
It's my job, man. All right. Thanks so much. Thanks to Suncast at the controls here at This Week in Radio Tech. Really appreciate his work. And I look forward to chatting with Cris and you guys next week about some more ways that we need to get audio to our listeners. One of those ways is through the studio transmitter link. We'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech.